Hey everyone, from Rolling Hills Covenant Church, this is Ask Anyway, the podcast where we get to explore the questions you've always wanted to ask, but maybe have been too afraid to. This is a safe space to wrestle, wonder, and be real with the questions that matter most to you. So if you have a question, don't be afraid, go ahead and ask anyway. If you are a keen viewer, you may notice that we changed our name from No Dumb Questions, and you may even notice it on the slide in the background sometimes. Don't worry, we still have the same focus and want to make the same valuable content for you and answer all your questions, now just with a new name. We hope you enjoy. My name is Nick Dethlefson, and I'm the host for the discussion today, and I'm joined by Mel, our Spanish Ministries Pastor, and Connor, our high school pastor. Today, our question is cussing really so bad? Connor, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think this question came to me from some of my young adults. I think in high schoolers even interact with all this. There's something about being young and being in school around a lot of non-Christians that brings up this idea of how important is the way that we talk. Is language itself sinful? Like, are there words that Christians just shouldn't say? And I think where it becomes a question is because there's a lot of scenarios and a lot of kind of subjective situations where it becomes a little murkier. Like, is me saying this word in this context really a bad thing? Or maybe in contexts where you go to a different culture, a different place where everyone uses a certain word to the point where it doesn't seem vulgar, but in your context, in your situation, that word is vulgar. So is there something wrong with the word, or is it something contextual? So it leads to a lot of questions. Have you experienced this, Mel? Like, have you been in cultures where certain words are just used or not used, or?
Well, I'm from Guatemala originally, and I speak Guatemalan Spanish, but then I came to the U.S. and you have to kind of jumble up your Spanish because you have to accommodate for like 20 something different countries.
Oh yeah.
That speak a different, even though you may hear it as the same, but words have different meanings. Like, even sometimes when I'm preaching, I'll say a word and I'll have an Argentinian come up and be like, hey, that word kind of means this.
Okay.
Maybe you don't want to use that in your sermon because like you could probably use it outside the pulpit, but not on the pulpit.
Okay.
So that's
because it's inappropriate, or because it just means something.
It definitely is inappropriate, and it means something vulgar.
Yeah.
So I've been guilty of cussing then, but I didn't know that was a cuss word for them. Like, for me, it's not.
Yeah.
In the context where I come from, it's not. So I think what you mentioned earlier is just the culture aspect, even for us. Like, we have like a vocational language, right? And you have more of like a seminary language that you would speak with seminarians, and that maybe a pastor language that you speak with pastors. But the way you speak to your wife is different, right?
Yeah.
And the way you may speak to, like, for me, like I'll speak to my homies in a different way, and I'll probably use language with them that I won't use with you because maybe you may find it offensive.
Yeah.
Because of just the different culture aspect of that. So that's another layer to the whole conversation of profanity, right?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So it comes down to what makes a word profane, or like what makes it bad? Is it that it offends people? Is that what makes a word bad? Or is it like the subject matter that the word is pointing to is inappropriate in some way? And so to help kind of flesh this out, and for people that maybe still don't understand what we're getting at, I came up with like a few scenarios that show some of the murkiness here, like different scenarios where it seems like maybe cussing isn't so bad, or maybe not cussing is bad, and we'll get to it. So maybe let's just read these scenarios and just to set the scene. So the first is maybe in the context of a vocation or a school, or here's military. So a woman named Mary went to one of the military service academies with the desire to serve her country. Upon arriving, she realizes that profane words lost their profanity because they were used in almost every sentence. Clearly, no one was offended by the language. In fact, it seemed that profanity was a great tool when she needed to motivate the underclassmen. Mary doesn't feel that she needs to censor her language in this context. Is she right? So that's one. So like, I think this is common. My parents both went to the Air Force Academy, and I know people that went to the service academies, and it's just a different type of language.
Yeah.
There's a sort of command and authority that comes with profanity. And it's used as almost a tool in these.
I think we all seen the movies, right?
Yeah.
It's just Saving Private Ryan, like G.I. Jane. I love that movie, and it's just like the CO, like they're just constantly
streams of vulgarity,
and it almost seems like if they're not liked that way, the message doesn't get across because the people that they're training are tough people. They're not gonna crack under anything else, right?
Yeah. So does this language become a tool to be used in this scenario?
Yeah.
And then next, maybe this is an example where someone's using profanity without using profanity. So little Johnny grew up in a Christian home and was taught not to use profane words. As he grew up and his friends started experimenting with using vulgar words, he chose less offensive and sometimes made up slang to express his feelings. Johnny is now able to express exactly the same ideas and concepts of vulgarity without the vulgar word itself. Though the string of letters that he uses is not explicitly vulgar, the meaning of his words is. Is Johnny doing something wrong here? So the question here is, has he found a way to cuss and use profane language without using profane language? And is that just as bad as using these other words?
So he's basically using kind of his own version of profanity without using that explicit 4-letter word. He's saying like shoot or something instead.
Yeah.
He's like kind of meaning the same thing.
But the heart's still there.
That's so interesting because it's like you're saying at the beginning too, it's the difference between maybe the word itself. And I think the words do have power in themselves. And talking about like the different cultures and stuff. I always think it's funny because whenever you like learn a new language, for the most part, for whatever reason, like swear words are the first words that people like want to teach you because it's like really funny or something.
Yeah. You want to learn some Spanish?
No. No, I forgot all my high school Spanish, but yeah, I just think it's kind of funny that that's the case. And I get it. It's like a little goofy and fun and stuff like that, but you don't know what you're saying. So it feels like innocent, but I think there is still like power in those words, especially to the people who know what they mean. But I resonate more with little Johnny's experience, because it's like you have the same desire to maybe use an explicit word, but then you're like, oh, well, I'm softening it because I'm not saying that exact thing. But then it's also convicting because you're like, well, you mean the same thing, or maybe you mean like a version of that thing. And I don't think, trying to be subjective on what is like sin and what's not is what, Jesus tells us to do. So, yeah.
In some way you are censoring yourself, but you're still trying to work around.
Yeah.
Like I remember I had this as a kid where my parents said like, you can't use the word crap. Like it's just too harsh. People, sorry for everyone at home who is uncomfortable.
So we're going to bleep that out later.
Yeah, we better bleep crap. But we're like, okay, well, what about crud? And my mom was like, okay, whatever. You can say crud. And so we'd say crud. And I remember one day my little brother did something. I think he forgot to do his chore and my dad made me do it. And while I was doing it, I looked at my brother and I was like, you're a piece of crud. And my mom heard it and she's like, okay, you can't use that word now either. Like, and I remember that was a moment that it clicked that I was like, oh, maybe the problem isn't the word. The problem is like what the word expresses. Yeah. And if I'm using this word in this way, like it's sinful and it's wrong.
Yeah. You assigned a meaning to it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. There's an assumed meaning that we all understood.
Yeah.
And it's like your heart behind it is you're calling your brother like you are this thing, which is bad.
Yeah.
And you're like, cursing him in a way.
Exactly.
Regardless of what the word actually is.
Yeah.
Well, it's even like today, like people get upset. Like if two Christians get upset, we're like, well, I'm going to pray for you.
Yeah.
And the other person's like, well, I'll pray even harder. Right? And then like, well, I'll do a Daniel fast for you.
You need the Lord's help severely. Yeah.
Right?
Good.
Yes.
Yeah, there's something like Christian-y about that.
Yeah.
Makes it feel not so bad.
Exactly. So like,
but you're insulting them.
Exactly. You're assigning a meaning to that, right?
Yeah, that's good. So there's a way to cuss without using cuss words.
Yeah.
I think what we're getting at.
Yeah. Okay.
And then maybe a third, which I've run into in my ministries. So Joe is tight with a group of Christian guys in his college group. They make it a point to hang out as a group once a week. They're so comfortable with each other that there are very few boundaries in their conversation. Every once in a while, one of them will use an expletive or cuss word for comedic effect. No one is offended, and it is funny. So what is the harm in that? So maybe this idea that maybe the problem with profanity is that it's offensive, that we shouldn't use it because there are people in the room that are going to have their feelings hurt by it.
So it's like if no one's offended, is it okay to use kind of thing?
Yeah. So if no one's offended, can we use a term in this way?
That's super interesting. I think, so I went to a Christian university, and there was, a few people here and there, not everybody. I don't want to speak badly against all Christian universities, but there were kids that would swear, a lot, like as much as anybody else would, who's not a Christian or who isn't going to a Christian school. And I was like really thrown off by that. I was like, dang, this is kind of crazy. I just said dang, so I guess that's also
How dare
a
you,
substitute.
Nick.
Yeah. No, now I'm like
Little
super
Johnny.
Little Johnny. But yeah, I was really surprised by that. And then it would surprise me even more to learn that those kids that were swearing like that never swore at all. They were raised in a Christian home. They're like, okay, that's really bad. I'm never going to do that. And it was only until getting to that university Christian setting surrounded by other Christians where they were swearing that they were like, oh, I guess it's okay for me to swear, and all this upbringing of, being really good about not swearing just went out the window because there was like an exemption or whatever to the rule. And they felt comfortable to do that. And I was like,
If everyone else is doing it, why wouldn't I?
Right.
Yeah.
I also think that there's this dynamic that we have. If you growing up in a Christian home, that swearing is out of bounds, dancing is out of bounds, drinking is out of bounds. Like there's like sex is out of bounds. Like there's like these 4 mortal things, right? Like you don't do, right? Like, and for me, like I wouldn't put cursing in category like that. I don't know that, but for some reason that's the morality that has been inscribed in our religious system per se, of what makes us different.
Yeah.
What separates us from like what you said, like they would have never done it in their homes or before they came to school, but at the school that doesn't separate them anymore. So there's something else, like there's a different dynamic in that school that sets them aside from the rest,
Yeah. So couldn't the argument be that it's a good separator? Like
I'm not saying it's
questions
bad.
Would come out of like, hey, why don't you use the same words that we use? And it could lead to good conversations of like, well, I think words are important, and could it be like a helpful indicator? Or so you putting it next to those other things and saying it shouldn't be seen exactly like those. And you said like mortal. What do you mean? Like define that category a little bit more for me.
Yeah, like the deadly sins, right? Like
okay,
right? Like that's kind of what I meant.
Yeah, and so what was it? Is sex? It was
sex, drinking,
rock and roll.
Yeah, right. Yeah, kind of right. And cursing is like right there.
Okay,
among those is like this is what separates us. But man, what if you're doing other horrible things?
Oh yeah, certainly.
Like I'm keeping these 4 things, but I'm messing up here.
Yeah.
Like what does that say about your relationship with Christ? I understand like, yes, like you said, it's a great separator, like for sure. Like it sets you aside per se in a culture where words matter.
Yeah.
But if you're doing everything else,
that's true.
Then what does it matter?
Yeah, when you stand before the Lord and you say, "Well, I didn't cuss," and He says, "Well, but you cheated and steal and
you gossiped and like all of these other things."
Yeah,
and like if the people that are around you know that about you, anyways. Oh, but I don't cuss. I'm cool.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
So it's that. I think that dichotomy.
Interesting. Right? Yeah, that's good. So maybe then arguments for cussing would be something like, well, if the problem is that it's offensive to people, then I can use these words around people that wouldn't be offended by them. That's one argument right here. And then, just the subjectivity of it that, well, there's a culture, like there's this group of people that use that word constantly, and it just doesn't mean the same sort of thing. So why is it bad in my culture? Pointing to like the subjectiveness of language is another argument that I hear for it. I've heard other people say that like it makes them more relatable to others. Do you guys have any like thoughts on these things, or even more arguments for it?
Well, there's this concept in missions of I forget what the name of the concept is, but essentially what it is like missionaries will take on a culture and they'll make it their own. Like they'll go to a Muslim place and they'll behave like a Muslim and they'll dress and like they'll do whatever, right? And it's not the best. I'm not saying this is the best concept, but it is a concept that has been used historically by missionaries, right? And they'll adopt that culture and like they'll become that, so that they can have an opportunity to speak about Jesus, right? Yeah. Like Paul said, like I became a Greek for the Greek, right? So a Jew for the Jew. So there's this, like what you just mentioned, is like, okay, well maybe it works for like creating conversation with other people and like
in some way,
or fitting in and stuff like that. So like the question is like, how much is fitting in worth to you?
Yeah, that's good.
You know, like, because yes, like if you're gonna come into a context where everybody's cussing and you want to fit in, so you do as well, like what is the purpose for that?
Yeah,
for sure. But for me, like, can I say a quick story real quick?
Yeah, do it.
So like we have a welding program at the church, right? Like a ministry. Reignite Hope. It's a great program. Like it takes in all kinds of people. So I used to be a chaplain. I actually took the welding class. I'm a certified welder.
Oh, really?
So I did it because I went in as a chaplain, and then I realized like, yeah, I have a lot in common with these guys. I come from South Central. Like I shouldn't have never made it and all of these things, right? But there was something that was lacking for me. So I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to take the class so that I understand exactly what they're going through in the class. Like, so I have burn marks in my hand, and like, I know how frightening not this one, but there's one up here. I know how frightening it is to like light up the torch and like, and do a pass. So I know that. But remember one of the Bible studies that I did, I took them through Mark, like the first couple of chapters of Mark. The very first one, when it talks about Jesus, the Son of God, right? Right there. And so we did the first 8 verses and we went through it, and I had each one read it, and, so they all read it and they all had different questions and this. And at the end of the class, this guy, I went up to his bench because, and then he's like, hey, I want to tell you something. I'm like, what's up? He's like, you know what we just read today? I was like, yeah. He's like, I would have effing read that 1,000 times and I would never effing gotten it. And I was like, okay.
Don't know what to do with that.
Right? But in a way, I had to respond to him so that he knew that I knew the deepness of what he just said. So how do I respond to him? How do you respond to that person that is making that, in his own words, this is a deep thing that he's saying? How do you not acknowledge that in his own way?
Okay.
In his own way of not only understanding, but of expressing himself. I'm reminded of this time when Jesus heals this young man because he has a speech problem. And he's coming around and he takes him to the side, and the boy has a speech problem where he can't completely say words, so he's like, And if you read the passage correctly, when Jesus prays to God, it says that he muttered, I don't know if that's the word, but the way that he speaks is almost kind of like what the boy was doing. Like he speaks to God in that way. So the first words that boy or that man ever hears is Jesus speaking to God as he would have spoken to God.
Interesting.
Isn't that crazy? Like, so anyway, so there's a power of words, even to like affirm someone, like, hey, I hear you. I got you.
Yeah.
without going too deep, of course, you know.
Yeah. So the argument there is there's moments where it's appropriate, where, in fact, the word itself could be more appropriate than other words. Which, is almost two different arguments. So one, like culturally, you're moving into the culture, and you talked about missions work. The fear there is syncretism. This idea that we so much adopt the culture that you're adopting things that don't line up with Christianity for the sake of trying to win people to Christ, but then you win them to Jesus with these other kind of pagan, wrong worship type things. That's the fear that the Bible commands us to repent and turn from things. And we never want to dole that down, the reality that to follow Jesus, to leave everything. But are there moments where in our language, using strong language is appropriate? And I think that's what you're describing with the Reignite Hope guy.
Exactly.
And I think that another argument for vulgarity is that at times the Bible seems to use it. So like Paul in Philippians 8, he's comparing his works to, I think the ESV has it as like rubbish or dirty rags or skubalan or something is the Greek word. And like clearest translation is human excrement, and probably like a vulgar word in the culture.
Which is? Oh.
But so we'd say, how can you use a vulgar word? And it's because it is the most appropriate word in that context. When he's saying, all these things that my life was built upon, all these things that was trying to earn me to heaven, the only thing I can call them now is trash, is garbage, is rubbish. Like vulgarity was appropriate in the moment.
Yeah, like for him, it's like such an intense moment that he's like, it's...
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And like literally like... Because what you just said is just in the moment, it was the most appropriate word. And it probably also raised it brought up not just the meaning of the word, but it just highlighted the fact that like, this is what it is. Like I have to use this word because I want you to truly understand that I don't mean anything else other than that.
And he's kind of using that word as a point to show how, meaningless his life was before that, and kind of in a way using that to direct people towards God, so he's cursing a thing that is bad, not just someone else that I don't know, cut you off in traffic or something like that. You're not cursing a person, you're cursing like something that is bad, that God says is bad too.
Perfect. Yeah. And that's the other place where we see this pretty prominently is Ezekiel. So Ezekiel, kind of through the whole book, we're struck by the audacity of the things God has him do to show Israel their faithlessness. Like right at the beginning, he commands him to lay on his side for days and to eat only food, this bread that God gives him the ingredients for, which is actually Ezekiel 4:9 bread. Have you seen that in the stores?
Yeah. We have it at the house.
Do you have it?
It's an orange kind of package. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's this recipe that God gives to Ezekiel, like only eat this bread. But the very next verse is God commanding him to cook it over human excrement.
That's crazy.
Like,
it's pretty gangster.
But like this whole brand, this like, look, it's just great bread. God gave us the ingredients. Like the command is cook it over human poop.
Yeah. Get yourself.
It just seems like a strange brand.
That's how our bread is made too.
Yeah, exactly. That's why
it tastes so bad.
Yeah, we don't know this, but Ezekiel 4:9 bread people are cooking it this way.
Okay, cool.
Well, so he's doing crazy things, and God is using these images to show Israel how defiled and how wicked and how off the deep end they've gone. And there, God says, cook it over human excrement. And Ezekiel says, Lord, I've never defiled myself in such a way. Please don't make me do this. And God says, okay, fine. Cow dung. You cook it over cow dung. And he says, thank you. So it's a really unique thing. But the word that Ezekiel uses for idols all through the book is a really unique word. We don't see it many other places. And it seems like it's linked with that same word that God uses to tell him to cook his food over, the human excrement. That there's this whole article in the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament that argues that the word is probably best translated as shit gods, for idols, like poop gods. That and doesn't give us reason to use the term. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But thinking about the context, thinking about what Ezekiel is trying to express to God's people, that they are worshiping pieces of wood, they're worshiping rocks, they're worshiping these things which are dragging them to hell, that are turning them from God. Like, the most appropriate term for Ezekiel to use in that moment is to say, like, look, you are worshiping dung.
Crap.
You're crap. Like, this is
Crud.
crud, yes. Crud. Like, yes, it seems like it could be vulgar, but it's deeply appropriate. Like, there's the people of God are being turned away to chase after dung, and Ezekiel needs to call it out.
And that's how specific God has to get for people in that context to understand exactly what he's trying to say.
Yeah.
Like, look, guys, exactly this, right? So, and the other thing, the point that you're making there is like, well, is it appropriate sometimes? Well, it's in the Word of God. Sometimes, you know, to make that point so that in these cultures, people would understand exactly what was meant. So this is a good argument, actually.
Well, but with that argument, I would like to just also, what we're arguing isn't like words are always, you can use any word anytime. We're arguing that there could be moments where it's appropriate to use strong language that comes across as vulgar. I'd also argue that as Christians in our day and age, we run into these moments few and far between. That, like, it's probably not often that profanity is appropriate. A friend used the example one time of, like, if I'm asleep in my bed and my family's asleep and I hear noises out in the living room and I wake up and I go out to look in the living room and someone's standing in my living room that's not my family, like, the most appropriate language is not, hey, bud, could you move along? Like, some profanity is probably going to come out of your mouth, and it's like in protecting and defending your family, and that moment might be appropriate for that type of language. But it's not often that we run into moments like that where profanity is perhaps the most appropriate language to be using. And more often, like, this argument that we just talked about are used to, like, well, I can just kind of use profanity to be funny or with my friends. And I'd argue that those probably aren't appropriate moments for it. That if we are taking our language seriously, if we're thinking highly about the words that we're using, it's not often that we'd ever say, well, this is the most appropriate term. That moment that you had with that guy in Reignite Hope, like, it's probably not happening every day, and it's few and far between.
Exactly.
Yeah, and just being aware too of, like, is my speech, you know, even in a safe space where no one's being offended, does it honor God? You know, like, we have to give an account for everything that we say. I wrote down Matthew 12:36. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give an account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Oof. And I feel like, for me, at least, you know, just being honest, swearing would only come up, like, with a stubbed toe or something, you know, like some sharp pain or whatever. So maybe that's more relatable to people on their everyday life, but still, that's like a careless thing to do.
It's not just aggressive words or angry words or mean words. It's careless, like not thinking about words. Yeah, and stubbing your toe as an example, like, it, you know, might just slip out or whatever, but you're still in control of what you're saying and how you're responding to that pain. And even if it's not directed at anybody, maybe you're cursing your table or your coffee table or whatever you stubbed your toe on, you're still being careless with your response to that. And then you're showing the other people around you too that it's okay to be careless with your words, or that you don't really care that much about how you use your words. Yeah. Well, and in that moment, you may feel like, I didn't really have much control. Like, I stubbed my toe and something came out. But actually, that moment was influenced by all the moments over the past 10 years that you have let those words slip. And
I was going to say that out of the abundance too of, like,
your heart, of
our heart, but also, like, of our words. Like, it's really hard for someone that hasn't been cursing all their life to all of a sudden come to a moment where that's what they do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, yes, like there's those moments where like words like that will slip out, but there's also an argument for like, well, because they have been harbored in your heart too. At some point.
Yeah.
To some level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, you know, it's something that it becomes the thing to say, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think I stand with you. Like, there's been those moments where it's like, oh, you know, like okay, and then you have to for me, it's okay. How bad is that? And should I come to God because of that in repentance?
Mm-hmm.
And like I found myself like, yeah, there's sometimes like, man, I really royally screwed that up. God, I need your forgiveness for this. You know, I should not have done that. Even though it was in a moment, even though it wasn't like something that I was thinking about, it was an impulse or whatever, but still, like you said, maybe there was no one around that was offended, but I'm pretty sure God did not like it.
Yeah, good. That's a good instinct.
You know?
That's a really good point. Even just being by yourself, you know, even in your head, the words that you use in your head, I mean, they'll also come out in your speech too. But even if you're like, I never swear around anybody, and examine like what's going on in your brain. Are you like, you know, swearing in your head to people? Or you just never would say it out loud because that's not the Christian thing to do. Yeah. It's like even what your self-talk is super influential.
Yeah. Well, and that's Matthew. I think it's Matthew 5, right? That it's not just the outward action that's the problem. It's the internal. Like you've heard it said that you shouldn't kill your neighbor, but if you hate your neighbor, you've already killed him in your heart. Like the inward thoughts, the inward actions are still actions.
Yeah.
That's really good.
That is good. So maybe this is probably a good transition into like, is there a clear spot in the Bible that tells us don't cuss? And we've listed out at least a few passages here that we probably have time to look at each one. So Ephesians 4:29 says this. Paul says, "Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear." So he starts, let no corrupting talk. So I think if we just take that by itself, what is corrupting talk? Anything which...
What's the other translation? Unwholesome?
Yeah.
Is that the same?
It's challenging because he uses a lot of words in a lot of different texts.
Yeah.
But here, by the context, we can tell that he's talking about words that tear others down.
Mm-hmm.
So when he says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only, he's saying, not corrupting things, instead let things that are good for building up come out of your mouths. So here he's condemning speech which tears down and speech which hurts people. And certainly there's moments where cussing is that. But I think we could also argue there's moments where cussing isn't that, where people use profanity and it's not tearing down and it's not, at the expense of another person. So this, I think in some ways says in some situations, cussing could be wrong. Like cussing, as much as it tears down your brother, is wrong. But as we'll look at the other passages, there are other moments where he speaks to other moments that cussing is maybe negative. So go to the next chapter, Ephesians 5. But sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. Let there be no filthiness, nor foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place, but instead let there be thanksgiving.
This is more specific, right?
More specific here. Yeah. It doesn't seem that it's the idea of tearing others down, but it's more speech that Paul says don't do it, and it seems like it's sexual in nature,
like filthy.
Yeah, the idea of filthiness is
foolish too, right?
Good, yeah, and he just brought up sexual immorality, but now, but sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you. So I think this is pretty clearly saying like
Related
sexual
to-
jokes, crude joking, like is particular. He's saying there's jokes that you guys probably shouldn't laugh at, that shouldn't be named among you. Which, some of them probably use profanity and others probably don't. That, like, there's just ways of joking with friends that Paul clearly says, don't let this be named among you.
Right, that's a good distinction to make too, when you're like, well, I'm not saying that explicit word, and not even just the little Johnny example, but just saying, oh, well, I'll make inappropriate, I'm
not tearing people down.
Yeah, or just I'm making an inappropriate joke that is disrespectful or vulgar or whatever, just for the sake of the laugh, but I'm not saying a 4-letter word or something like that.
Yeah, that I can say a kind of explicitly sexual joke without using bad words.
Right.
So I'm safe.
Yeah.
No, I think Paul's saying that's not true here.
Yeah.
Well, what's really interesting is that he's writing this to a church that was pretty good. He's not writing it to the Corinthians. He's writing to the Ephesians.
Yeah.
And he's saying among you. So he's probably correcting something that's happening among them, or like at least don't find yourselves in this place.
Yeah.
Right.
So meaning maybe it was already happening there and he's correcting it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
So,
and it's probably a cultural thing as well.
Exactly.
It's culturally normal to make these sort of jokes. And also what's interesting is the alternative he gives us. So in the last one, he says, don't use corrupting talk. Instead, build people up. Here, he says, don't use filthy or foolish, crude jokes or talk, but instead, let there be thanksgiving. That, like, the opposite of profanity, the opposite of crude and sexual joking is actually thanksgiving to God. Like, our language in all things should reflect and represent our thankfulness that God has created us, that God has saved us, that God has set us apart for holiness. In some real way, like, to say no to these things is to reflect our thankfulness that God is our God. Which is cool.
And using our speech in a way that's honoring and giving thanks to God. Like, I wonder if he's saying too, like, just you're kind of almost wasting your time. Like you're using your speech for something that's so meaningless, and not only meaningless, but bad. Like, it's a negative, foolish thing. But why aren't you using that time that your mouth is open and making sounds to like be giving thanks to God?
Be thankful. Yeah, that's good. Colossians 3, verse 8 is another moment.
Okay, so 7. In this you too once walked when you were living in them, but now you must put them all away: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices.
Good.
Yeah.
So the list: get rid of anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk from your mouths. It seems, so the language here is helpful. The from your mouths is probably not just dictating the obscene talk, but at least the slander as well, and probably these other verbs like angry speech, wrathful speech, malicious speech. It's probably what he has in mind based on the syntax of in the grammar.
From your mouth. All of these things are coming from their mouth.
That he's talking down about ways of speaking that are harsh, obscene, slanderous, wrathful. Even the next verse in 9, do not lie to one another. So he's talking about everything having to do with our speech as it relates to other. He's saying, get rid of wickedness, get rid of anger, get rid of malice, get rid of wrath. Like, the way that you can use words to hurt others or to express like a hatred or a lack of love for others. So again, this is another specific sort of language that he's saying no to. And what's helpful about that is it's not just cussing. It's not just obscene. Obscene talk isn't just cussing. And it's probably at least partly some cussing. There's a way to cuss in a really wrathful and malicious and violent and slanderous way to people.
I've seen it.
But there's a way to do these same things without cussing, to be harsh and to be angry and to...
You're not building each other up. You're tearing people down.
Yes, you're hurting. Like, you're expressing unlove. That's a weird way to put it, but we're supposed to express love in all things. And when you're expressing things that aren't love, it's the opposite: wrath, anger, malice, slander, lying.
Yeah, there's a, I know that this podcast will probably go out to believers.
Yeah, probably.
And, but if there's people that would hear this, that, maybe this is not the rule of faith or the rule of their morality or ethics or whatever, but there is this culture of people that for them, this offensive language kind of like it's part of their vocabulary. Like they can't go a couple words without saying an explicit a cuss word, right? And but even in that, there is a way to use that speech with anger, with malice, with deceit, right? That I would say this is what the Bible is talking about. Like perhaps there is no other way that you can communicate your that you can process your thinking without using cuss words, but there is a way that you use those cuss words that you use to communicate that perhaps also communicates anger and wrath and this. It's just the way, even the tone that you give to a word would say like, hey, you're trying to hurt me.
Yeah.
Rather than like, oh yeah, we're being cool.
Yeah.
So it is that. But the point I wanted to make was like, in the other ones, it says, but instead.
Yeah.
And right here, it says, put on, right? Like,
oh, good.
Put on the new self. Like that's what you used to be. That's where you're being called out of. But that's not who you're supposed to be in Christ.
Yeah. Finish verse 10.
Yeah.
And have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. So our new self is being renewed in knowledge. We're moving more into the knowledge of God, which is our creator. Like, look how God used words. Like, think of Genesis 1, where God's words create. Like, his words are meaningful and powerful, and at the center of all things, the reason for all things, the origin is God speaking things into existence. As we move more into his image, we're going to use words more meaningfully. Like we're going to have less careless words. We're going to recognize the power of words. And I think we'll get to it in a little bit, but the primary expression of that is our words express the gospel. That like the primary command for Christians is in relation to our world is to make disciples of all men, to go out and share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Those words are powerful. Like those words are the words of eternal life. So why would we use any other words? Why?
I think it's very cool here that the idea that Paul's bringing forth is like, hey, if this is who you are, if this is the way you speak, like even within the church, right? He's sending this letter to a church. Like, hey, put on the new self.
Good. Yeah.
The call is, okay, leave that behind.
Yeah.
That's in the past. God is calling you to something different. And I think what you were mentioning, the power of words and the gospel, like that's Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah.
God is calling you to this other way of being and using words, right? So,
and that's a great note what you brought up, this idea of sanctification of when someone gets saved, they've lived a certain way for a really long time, and that tends to linger.
It influences you, who you are. Sin
has so saturated us that even after we trust Jesus and we've been regenerated and made new, our sinful self still seeps out. And it's this oftentimes, unfortunately, rather slow process of God slowly whittling away our hardened heart and killing our sin and making us more into his image. So yes, the brother that has lived using 10 F-bombs in every sentence for his whole life, and when he's in his 40s and he comes to Jesus, we shouldn't expect him to, in a day, be able to let go of every one of these, like not slip every day.
I want to hang out with that guy like the first 2 days that he's come to Jesus.
Yeah. Well, I imagine like there's this immediate vigor of like, I'm done with it.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to use this language.
Yeah.
But it's just going to be met with moments of like, oh no, what did I say?
I mean, it's just like, I love to think about the idea that Jesus would hang out with, like he was accused of like, hey, you're hanging out with tax collectors, with sinners, with this. I mean, just imagine Jesus's day. You know, as he's going through the things, it's like, you know, he hears some of his followers like, man, and they're like, oh, Jesus is there. Like, Jesus knows what's up, you know, he knows what's going on. Like, they're still working things out.
Yeah.
You know, like, so just imagine all of that. Like, they're still being people.
Yeah.
You know, they're trying their best, but even in the Gospels, we realize that even the disciples never got it.
Yeah.
You know, like even John and his brother, like, hey, we want to bring down thunder. Curse these people. Right? So like, but anyways, it's just.
Well, in those moments, the brother, he'll let it slip and he's faced with, oh, Jesus, I'm a sinner. Forgive me. Thank you for your grace.
I hang out with people like sometimes like I'll come in and there's a party or something and like sometimes they're not believers, right? It's a house of a believer or a party where a believer, somebody invited me. So I come in and sometimes there's like a beer bottle on the table.
Yeah.
And so I'll come in and like there's sometimes when the brother, not the brother, but the person will be like slow.
You didn't see that?
Right. Putting it down and like you hear like, okay, like the voice is changing or the words that are being used, they're being changed. Oh, the pastor's here now, like things like that, right? But for me, in those moments, I'm like, this is the beauty of the gospel. You know, the fact that even non-believers understand, like, hey, there's something new is in the environment.
Oh, good. God is calling us to newness,
right?
To live
something
differently.
new is in the environment, and even like sometimes the person that I know or that is a believer in that party or whatever, they'll be like, hey, sorry about that. I'm like, hey, people are being people, you know, but the fact that they know they're called, that somehow the call is to be different.
Yeah.
Right. Like Paul saying, like you are to put on the new self.
Oh, good.
Right. So even non-believers see that too. Like they'll will be judged by the words that we use. Sometimes it's by the people that we think we're being cool with. You know, so like, hey, I thought you were a believer, bro. Like, why would you say that?
Yeah.
Like even in this passage I was studying this week with Abraham and Abimelech, and Abimelech comes to him and is like, hey, what were you thinking? Why would you even do that to me?
Yeah.
Why would you say that? He lied to him, right?
Yeah.
Like a non-believer, a heathen in Abraham's eyes, calling him out like, bro, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
Right? So we have to be careful with that.
Good.
In the alternative he gives us in this book, so chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. So make the best use of your time. Like what you said, Nick, this idea of like, you only have so many words, so why are we wasting them on unthankful speech? Let your speech always be gracious. And I think at the heart of that is we rule out a lot of profanity. Like,
right.
How is every word that I'm speaking gracious in representing the love of Jesus, the outflowing of Christ in our lives? So those are kind of the main moments in the New Testament where language comes up. And then maybe the other one to talk on, James 3.
Oh yeah, James 3.
Like the tongue passage, right? And again, there's room here to say, it seems like he's talking about gossip and he's talking about slander and he's talking about pride. Is the words that we're using, like vulgar or not, really on James's mind and on his heart? I would say you're right. Probably his primary, what he's speaking against is pride. And what he's speaking against is slander and gossip and putting others down. Those three things seem to be, because he's just talked about partiality. He's just talked about How do we really care for people and love them well? But his basis that the tongue is important. Like it's this rudder that moves the whole ship. Like if anybody can tame their tongue, they're perfect. Like if anybody can really put a bridle on their tongue and watch every single word, they've succeeded in not sinning. Like that's a bold claim. And so he's highlighting how important our words are. That words themselves can be deadly. Like where is it that he says, verse 6. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. So that's 5 and 6.
H-E-L-L. Double hockey sticks.
Double hockey sticks. Our whole bodies are set on fire by our tongues. Like, it's not a small matter. It's not, my words are meaningless. It's our whole course of life is dictated by the words that we say. Like this, how on earth could we ever think lightly about our words after hearing James say these things?
Yeah, that's good.
And then verse 11, I highlighted as well. Oh yeah, this is good. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening, both fresh and salt water? So this idea that with the same mouths, how can we bless and curse? So I think what's at the heart of it is what I mentioned previously, that we as Christians believe that our words are the most important thing in the world because we use them to express the gospel, that sinners are saved by the gospel and that gospel is proclaimed through our mouths. So how can our mouths be used for both cursing and blessing God? How can our mouths be used for both preaching the gospel and making jokes, explicit sexual jokes with our buddies? Like that, James is saying these two things don't work together. Like if we truly recognize how important our words are, then we won't waste them on foolish speak.
Yeah.
I think that convicts me that how many of my words have I wasted when God has given us the words of eternal life? These are the things we should be saying.
Yeah, going back to the passage before you read in Colossians 4.
Yeah.
I write on my Bible, so I have some notes here.
Dare you.
The ultimate blessing of speech is to share the gospel of Jesus.
Good.
You know? And like even here with the season with salt makes things taste better, last longer, and makes you thirsty. Like our words should make people thirsty for Jesus, you know?
Yeah.
The way we speak, the way it matters.
Yeah.
Speech matters.
Yeah.
Right? And yeah, maybe there's like those specific moments where like, man, that word just
seemed appropriate in the moment.
Not only does it seem appropriate, but it has to be that. Because other than that, the point will not be made across. Like even with this guy, the welder that I share with, or the Bible passages. But like you said, those are like few.
Yeah.
There are very few occasions where that particular that will probably call for something like that.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not talking like every other day. Like I don't know if I've ever come to a moment in my whole life where that was the appropriate word to use.
Right. Yeah.
Like very far in between.
Would you say like maybe referring to like our sin, that kind of language could be somewhat appropriate? Maybe this is going down a rabbit trail too.
No, that's good. That's good rabbit trail. I think it depends on the context.
Sure.
I love church history, and Martin Luther is known for just like cussing out the devil, like just going about his life and just, Satan, F you, like cussing out. And I think the modern people in us look at that and are like, wait, whoa, Luther? No, what? But
man, talk about doing ministry in those kind of contexts. We went to a prayer retreat really quick. Went to a prayer retreat, and like there's a group of people that I'm in charge for. Like we're supposed to be praying for these other people, and like this one kid is with me from the church. He's like, "All right, Billy, it's your turn." And he's like, "Devil, I'm going to shank you. He starts going like this. I'm like
there's something also about that of like recognizing the wickedness and evil in this world, and despising it, and saying, Satan, there's nothing for you but the lake of fire.
Yeah.
And using maybe colorful language, but
yeah, not saying you should use that every time, every prayer or something like
Certainly
that, or
not.
every time you're talking about your own struggles with sin or someone, or just condemning sin in general. But I guess if there was an appropriate way to kind of use that language to condemn something that's truly fitful, I guess, fitting for the type of language that you're using, it would be towards the enemy, towards Satan, and towards sin itself.
Yeah, where Paul does it.
Right.
My works were rubbish. It was trash.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's something cultural going on with Luther too. Like he's a German that like this is how they talked, and this is pretty normal. The number of times he said that the Pope can eat farts is like it's funny because we're modern people in our culture to hear this, but so at its core, use language appropriately. Like I think is what we're called to as Christians is we must recognize that every word is meaningful. It's not. We can't just let careless speech out there. And maybe my final note is maybe for those brothers and sisters who are in Joe's situation where he's like, when I'm just among my Christian friends, like we'll drop one and it's funny every once in a while. I think we lose sight of how far our words go. That they're like, it's safe because no one's offended, and I'd never do it in front of kids or in front of my youth students or that sort of thing. But I've been in that situation where this person is saying this, and I've heard from other youth kids that like, no, I know he cusses. Like I didn't hear him cuss, but I heard this person say that he cussed, and this person says that he uses this word. Like you think you're safe. You think you're among people that are never going to let that out or let that slip, but it just kind of happens that, oh yeah, I heard he uses this sort of language. And
it's a good examination of like what kind of integrity that you want to have too, you know, like how do you behave behind closed doors versus out in front of other people, and you don't know the reach of your words, like you're saying.
Well, that's what they say integrity really is how you behave behind closed doors, right? Like, so I think for me, like the note to live, to just leave behind from this conversation, it's kind of similar to what you're saying. It's like, words matter.
Words matter.
Mm-hmm.
For sure, words matter. And maybe there's appropriate times when that kind of language, what is called for that kind of language. But just to borrow from you, it's just, as believers, our ultimate goal is to preach the gospel.
Amen.
And is our speech going to hinder that?
Yes.
Is the way that we are perceived by others going to hinder that? And if they're not going to be receptive to the gospel because of the words that I use, then am I condemning my brothers and sisters because of the way I speak?
Yes.
You know? So.
Yes. So please, like anyone listening that heard us kind of point to Paul's scubalon and human excrement and Ezekiel, not every like person sitting in the pew needs to hear that. Like little old lady, 85-year-old member in our congregation doesn't need to hear that like Ezekiel used this type of language. That doesn't, but he was using it appropriately, and that's the call. Like, let's use our language appropriately.
Yeah. And I'd want to encourage to anybody, any Christian to, or, you know, new believer or whatever, like you said, your speech means something, but the lack of certain speech also speaks volumes as well.
Yeah, that's good.
Standing out from, you know, whatever's normalized, something being normalized doesn't give you permission to talk like that. And I realize there's certain circles that I have no experience in, that I don't want to speak for everybody saying that, but it creates such a distinct like witness when someone's engaging, and maybe you're not drinking or something like that. Maybe you're not swearing, and it's like, oh, this guy's different. I also realize that tension too in my own life too, feeling like people think, oh, well, this guy thinks he's better than us, you know, like he doesn't want to divulge in these, you know, unclean things or whatever. But I think there's also an opportunity to still, you can be honest with people about how life is, what your struggles have been, how it's been having Christ in your life, and that honesty will connect with people more. I would argue more would connect more with people than just, you know, maybe swearing or something like that. So just as a note of encouragement to like that your language or the lack of profane language can set you apart and kind of create that example for other people.
Yeah, that's good. That feels like a common objection with a lot of things of like, oh, you just think you're better than us.
Right.
And I've heard Christians like justify a lot of actions because, well, I just don't want to make it seem like I think I'm better than them. And it's just hard to line that up with the biblical witness. Like, I don't know, I think of like Daniel, who comes into Babylon and Israel's just been like, Jerusalem's decimated, and yet he clings to the food laws and he says, I have to eat kosher. Like, this is what God has called me to do. Even though everyone else is eating other food, everyone else is eating the best food, he still says, nope, I'm not going to do it. I'll eat this instead. And God honors that and blesses that. Like he easily could have said, well, I just don't want to seem better than everybody else, so I'm just going to do what they do. And
maybe it takes a little bit longer to kind of build an authentic relationship with that person because they think like, oh, well, you're better than me. But once they do know you, then you've already established this solid ground of, I am different in these ways because of my convictions. I'm still a real person and struggle with things just like you do, and life's hard, and let's do it together and talk about Jesus. But again, it might take a little bit longer, but I think it's worth it. Yeah,
you're totally right. Like when you build up cred, like people, like even will guard you. I had that happen to me. Like, come into a circle and like, hey, he doesn't drink, or or let's not use that word, because they're guarding you. They know that you're real.
They respect you for that.
Yeah. Then, like you said, like it has been built up, right? So perhaps that's a different another thing too. Like, hey, we are called to live in a manner that is worthy of our calling.
Amen.
Our calling of Jesus Christ, right?
Yeah.
So I think as much as we strive to do that in our speech, the more that we can be a witness to others.
Yeah,
that's good. For sure. Good word.
Well, thank you so much for joining and listening in on our conversation today. We hope that it was helpful for you. And we'd love to keep discussing questions just like these. If you want to ask your own question, email us at ask@rhcc.net. And thanks for joining us.